first thing you'll see in that silty water is something that looks like a red rag waving in the current, and then the whole fish will sort of materialize for you.
Oh, there they are, on the bed, right there. Circle around this way.
Along this river winding, a man could never tell just where he might be hiding his dark elusive scales. Oh, his dark elusive scales.
I'm Jim Brown. I'm professor of history at Samford and have been since 1971. Came here from Tennessee and didn't know much about the lay of the land. Got down here and the earthworms were blue and big wicked black grasshoppers with yellow lines and bass that had a bluish cast. It was a strange new world, 250 miles away from home. Used to go down to Bulldog Bend. A man who ran the canoe shop was named Joe Grammer, and he talked about some people who caught redhorse with nooses, which is a strange thing to me. And I asked him about it, and he didn't know the details, but he'd watched them from the bridge catch these redhorse. And so I said, well, how would I find out about this? And he said, there's an Arthur Lovejoy, lives down at 6 Mile. And so I know I went down, it was about 1978, went down there with Bill Finch, who was at that time undergraduate student at Samford. And we found Mr. Lovejoy at home, and we talked to him through the screen door for a while. He said, but you need to get with my nephew Mott Lovejoy. And he's crazy about that. So that's all the encouragement I needed. Mott worked at a construction firm of some sort. Mott was 6'4", raw-boned, big old country boy. And he had a great sense of humor, partly from his uncle. He said, come down and says, I'll call you and we'll go red horsing.
I met Dr. Brown a year ago when I took his folklore class, and I knew he wasn't going to be the typical professor when he walked in wearing a denim suit, denim pants, denim shirt, denim jacket. It was very hands-on, earthy sort of class, and we just went out and did things. And he's the guy who first introduced me to the River Redhorse. That was one of our projects in the class. We went on a canoe trip to go find some, and we didn't. And so that sort of planted the seeds in my mind for this documentary.
Josh came to us with the idea of doing a documentary on River Redhorse fishing, and personally I love fishing, so I was really stoked about the project.
When Josh approached us with the documentary, I honestly was skeptical because I had no idea anything about fish, the river, the Cahaba River, the surrounding Birmingham counties. It was just something that I wasn't really sure of.
As we got to talking more about the tradition and just the folklore surrounding the red horse and actually snaring the red horse, definitely started to get a lot more interested and thought there was a lot of possibilities to it.
So once we sort of found out that this was a really unique fish and a unique practice, I think that made the documentary a lot more appealing to me.
Needless to say, it was interesting, and I had never heard of this fish called the red horse before. And when he told us about it, I was just like, I've never even heard of anything like this, never heard of anybody doing it, so why not? Let's make a documentary about it. Sounds like it could be cool.
Red horse are on the bed from here up to Indiana. It's a fairly common fish, and people catch it all up and down the river.
They're all over the country, actually, but it's only in Alabama that there's this unique, specific tradition of snaring them. You take a 20-foot pole, tie a guitar wire noose to it, and one time a year they come up to spawn, and that's the only time they're tame enough to catch. So you literally go out there and you lasso them.
And the reason is that the red horse are a sucker, and so you can't cast out a line because they just feed off the bottom.
I'm sure it goes back to Indian origins. Indians did so much snaring with nooses. They snare. We know they snare. We have records of them snaring big sturgeon by the tail. You get a noose, work a noose around the tail of one of these big 100-pound, 150-pound spawning sturgeon, and then hang on until you wore it out. And he was counted a cockarouse, the Indian who held on to that.
We just wanted to figure out the story behind, or the history behind catching red horse and why people wanted to do it, why people still continue to do it.
Mott would have the key to all the landowners' fences that led into the Cahaba. He knew all the shoals. And he and his uncle they told stories that went back to 1913 about this red horsing. This would have been 1978, 1980, and they were telling stories about things that happened almost 60 years before.
We had to decide whether we wanted to use fiberglass poles or real river cane poles. The river cane poles are kind of the traditional way of doing it, and we thought, you know, well, we're doing a documentary on a Cahaba River tradition, we might as well do it the traditional way.
Most people don't know this, but right down here is a veritable jungle of river cane. So we're gonna go cut some down.
On the river, when they're red horsing today, they use fiberglass poles, these little extensible poles, where you got 5 sections of 4 feet, and you can just put it in the bottom of the canoe, and when you get ready to red horse, you just put it out. But the classic way was to use bamboo. And the way Mott taught me to cure bamboo, you cut down 3 fairly equal pieces, 20 to 25 feet.
A year ago, I was in Dr. Brown's folklore class where we had to cut down like 70 of these things for river cane baskets, so hopefully I'm an expert. Hopefully I'll show these guys how to do it. An expert I am not.
Let's get the phone out of the way.
All right, Jeremy wins the cane sawing contest.
Yeah.
When it first comes out of the ground, it's not as tough. And for basket making or fishing poles, you're looking for old bushy top cane. It's got a tough rind.
So cut just right below the...
Just blow a joint, any joint. We got plenty of tree to work with. Nothing gonna cut it all down.
All right.
Just get here and it's all gone.
Hey, one more. One more. Who wants to saw one more?
Try it.
So close. Like, pull it back for him so he can get in there.
There we go.
And you tied them together every foot or two, as hard as you could tie them in triangles after you trimmed them. Yep, you need to trim these off without materially weakening without cutting too much into the joint to weaken it. One. And it's the same stuff that, it's kin to Oriental bamboo. It's the same stuff that pandas eat. And depending on the species of cane, they'll die. They'll all die. Like every 120 years, they'll all die. They'll flower and then they'll die. And whatever lives on them, like pandas, can be in big trouble because it takes a while for the seeds to catch. But it's used for everything in the Orient. Just everything. They make everything out of it.
One down.
Cardinal. Cardinal.
Either side, just a big splash would be nice.
I've cut cane poles before, but never industrially in quantity like this. But this way Mott Lovejoy said do it, and Mott said do it like this, and you do it like this.
After you cut down the cane poles, you have to hang them up to dry. To fish, you need to make sure that the pole is as straight as possible. So the idea is that you hang them up from a high tree and the gravity straightens the poles as they dry, and then they're usable as fishing poles.
You think we could try like that?
Does someone have a sign?
This land is your land, this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the redwood forests to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me.
Stay away.
As I was walking a ribbon of highway, I saw above me an endless skyway. I saw below me a golden valley. This land was made for you and me.
The Redhorse spawn usually in April or early May. And if they say if you have to pick a day, probably April 20 is as close as you can get, but it depends on the cold. This has been a cold winter, so it may be later. A lot of the old regulars who do this, they kind of rely on an unfolding calendar of spring itself when the plants do what. Sometimes down on the river, what they call bush ivy, which is what most everybody calls mountain laurel. When the mountain laurel is just about to bud out, that's when some people go. But Mott Lovejoy, who taught me, he said, you look for the tulip poplar to be wide open. Tulip poplar blooms to not just fresh open, but be out there a week or two and be wide open. That's when prime time is to go red horsing.
Before we actually were going to go out and catch the fish, we needed to learn a bit about the Cahaba itself.
Josh came in and started talking about the idea of all of us taking a canoe trip one day and just spending a day out on the river for us to get out there and experience all the stuff we were researching and actually get a chance to try and red horse ourselves.
And so we went to the Cahaba River Society.
I'm Beth Stewart. I'm the executive director of the society. My son, when he was little, used to say I was the boss of the Cahaba River, and I would say, no, nobody bosses the river. But the organization, yeah, I'm the leader, and I'm sort of a jack of all trades in terms of management, but also a lot of program work on stormwater, smart growth, and working with faith leaders.
My name's Randy Haddock. I'm the field director, and I guess I try to spend more time out in the field looking at development projects. We have a recreation program where we get folks out on the river, and certainly that's an important part of what we do is allow people to experience it, and that helps a lot because when folks see it, when they are there, they get it. They understand what it is we're talking about and why we're so enthusiastic about protecting this great river.
The red horse are exciting to see in the river because they're big fish. You know, a lot of the fish we find in the Cahaba are beautiful, but they're little, and the red horse are big, and they're just a gorgeous scarlet color in their fins and tails when they're in their mating colors.
When the female is ready, when she's ripe and full of eggs, she'll move up onto a gravelly shoal. Now, the shoals, if you look at the stream bed, there'll be a shoal. Of course, the rivers slope downhill, but there'll be kind of a rise, and that's where a shoal is. And water literally moves down through the gravel. So when the female spurts out her eggs, they sink down into the gravel and get caught up there and get this constant aeration of fresh, well-oxygenated water.
And a horse will ease on either side of her, and they'll kind of shimmy together. I guess the horses are sort of pushing the eggs out of her, and at the same time streaming milk.
If the milt is right there close to the eggs, then you get the eggs fertilized and they settle into the gravel, and then have this nice current that keeps the eggs healthy until the babies hatch.
And usually it's a shy fish. I mean, it's not a fish you can sneak up on or noose any other time of the year.
In the midst of all that activity, they're in shallow water, and you can really just walk right up to them, and they're not really interested in you.
When they get really tame, as Mott would say, they'll be spawning right at your feet. I mean, your shadow can be falling on them, and they're still spawning.
And there was a little sort of narrow chute of water, and we were going to try to catch some fish while everybody else was up the hill botanizing on the glades. So we got a couple of folks to hold the net, and I went up to just kind of scare fish down, and I saw whoosh, I saw this big fish shoot down in front of me, and it was in the net. And I kept yelling at him, pull up the net, pull up. I told him before, wait till I get down there. But so finally I persuaded them to pull up the net, and we had this nice big beautiful red horse, and nobody around to look at it. So we swamped a canoe and put the fish in there until everybody came back and could see firsthand the red horse.
And annoyed the poor fish.
Well, we did annoy the fish for a while.
I noticed the other day the poplar trees are budding out, starting to unfold leaves, and they'll unfold, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 leaves, and then comes the bud, and it all happens in a rush. So here we are, first day of April, and they spawn before as early as, I know, April 7, April 10, so now's the time we need to go check the river at the likely spots.
So Dr. Brown and I decided to drive out to Bibb County, which is where Mott Lovejoy was from, and we wanted to go check some of the likely spots, such as Bulldog Bend, which is a place where the fish have been known to spawn in the past.
We're at Bulldog Bend on the Little Cahaba River, where Joe Grammer had a canoe rental outfit 30 years and more ago. Come down here with me. You see him? See the fish in there?
Yeah.
That's a smaller sucker. That's not the red horse sucker. And there's a gar. He's dark and he seems to swim just with the back fifth of his tail, see?
Yeah, it looks like just a long black line.
Yeah. That's a needle-nosed gar. They have got so many little needle teeth in there. It's April the 5th, so we're a little bit early, but you can see the smaller sucker on the yellow gravel shoals, probably just feeding. And we saw one big red horse kind of scoot across the bottom part of the deep hole. So this is just classic red horse territory. And a spot that Mott told stories about that went back for decades, 30 years ago.
One, two baby ones,
half grown,
and then the other.
Man, that's a big fish.
My name is Paul Freeman, and I'm a freshwater ecologist with the Nature Conservancy here in Alabama. The Nature Conservancy is a private, nonprofit conservation group that works to protect land and water all across the state of Alabama, across the U.S., and now in about 33 different countries. Nature Conservancy is also working on a project on the Alabama River, working with the Corps of Engineers, folks from the state of Alabama, the Fish and Wildlife Service, Geologic Survey of Alabama, and Auburn University to reconnect the lower Alabama River and the Gulf of Mexico through Mobile Bay to the river reaches like the Cahaba River.
There were fish runs of fish that would come from the bay and the Gulf up the rivers of Alabama and rivers on the whole coast. Just as everybody thinks of salmon as doing that on the west coast and further north, but that also happened all throughout our area as well until we had so many dams. And then once a dam is there, the fish can't get past that point.
And when you impound a river like that, you really reduce the flora and fauna down to just a small subset of what was there.
So the Nature Conservancy worked with a suite of partners to remove an obstacle, an old abandoned bridge that served as a dam across the Cahaba River.
Cahaba is a great candidate. It's got some little dams on it. You know, there's one at 280 and some smaller ones, but by and large, it's still a free-flowing river. And as close as it is to Birmingham, it really is going to be hard to keep it the way it is.
There's a lot of partners are working to basically use the locks in the dams on the Alabama River as fish elevators, to where they'll keep the downriver side of the lock open for a long period of time, and the fish still, I mean, it's been generations for them since they've actually been able to come upstream of that. It's still their instinct, and so they're banging their little noses against the dam. And so once they've got a way through, they'll come into the lock, and then they eventually will close that lock and they'll raise the water level and then open the upstream, and then those fish can come on through. And so they're actually using the lock to move the fish and reconnect. And if this works, it will be the longest anadromous fish run in the eastern United States.
I see signs, kids are getting educated in sort of ecological things and how to preserve it. And they seem to have a natural appreciation for all these life forms that maybe as adults we've gotten too jaded to appreciate. A matter of just getting folks out on the Cahaba. You can get people out there with Randy and Beth on a pretty day and see that river, they'll never think about it the same again.
And thinking about catching the Redhorse, we were worried that we might actually get out to the Cahaba and it wouldn't happen. We wouldn't find anything. And when we found Tommy Campbell, Dot Brown told us that he has a spot that's just prime for red horsing.
And Mott has passed away, but Tommy's still around and he still goes out and red horses every year.
Yesterday I walked to the library from my office, and there was some poplar blooms on the tulip poplar tree were in bloom. I thought, uh-oh, better call Tommy. So I called Tommy, and sure enough, he's found the fish.
And this was literally our only shot to get this. This was the only time. Tommy said that this is the prime time. Today is the day, and so we made the decision to go out there and to try to catch this fish.
We're going to cut down the cane and just for practice tie on a snare and see what it looks like.
Got to let it drop.
And then you'll take a long cane pole with a couple of feet of line from the tip of the pole, and the rest of the line wound around the pole. And then you have to have a little wire noose likened to this with a weight on the bottom. And the noose has a kind of a slip knot on one end and a little kink to hold it straight. But you just use your loop as the basis for your for winding it up. Just wind the wire up together and wind the cord up together, except for the last few feet. And so when you go to the river, you got several of these already made up when you go and you slap them on your pole. And then the way you work the noose is you lift it upstream from the fish and you lower it on the bottom and you drag it along the bottom, and the weight keeps the loop of the snare square across the current. And hopefully you work it around the snout of the fish and behind the gills and in front of the pectoral fins. And when you do, then you pull up to tighten on the fish. A lot of times the fish will tighten on you. The fish will take out and tighten on you before you do that. And if the fish goes upstream or downstream, and there's no slack in the line, you've got a cane pole, 2 feet of line in the fish, and you've got a 4-pound fish or 5-pound fish right around the middle with head and tail free. And if you go upstream or downstream, the fish will take some of the slack. But if it goes yonder way, it's just you and the fish, and you could be tied to a pickup truck. And you're out there in knee-deep fast water anyway, and as Mott said, it'll get you down sometimes in the river.
So the very next morning, we skipped class, packed up our river cane, and drove out to Bibb County.
We're gonna go out to try to catch the River Redhorse. This is a Friday, April the 16th, 15th? 16th. We're gonna go meet Tommy Campbell, and he's gonna take us to a special place that he knows where he's been monitoring the activity of the Redhorse. And apparently they've started spawning, and today should be the prime day to try to catch them. So if we're gonna do any River Redhorse catching, it'll be today.
Is that your wading shoes?
These are my wading shoes.
Them boys got something to learn, ain't they? All right.
4 years on in man's efforts have tried to catch his pace, but he keeps on a moving, just going his own way. Oh, going his own way.
Well, that's a vision right there.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I've seen this right here one time other than this, which this river's changed. All this used to be, it was just a gravel bar. I'm Tommy Campbell. Been red horse fishing for about 60 years, close to it.
Todd Lovejoy, been red horse fishing since I was 16 years old. William Campbell, I'm Tommy's son. I've been fishing about 35 years, I guess.
It's a family tradition that's been in our family for 80 years that I know of. Nowadays, you just put one of these on your pole, and I take this with me in my shirt pocket. If you break a snare, you get an extra.
And you hadn't got to worry about unstringing your pole. You just keep that wrapped around your pole.
Right. That's some of the old snares like we used to do them, tie them on, and then the wire and loop them and do all this stuff.
That's the way I showed the boys how to do it.
Exactly.
I'm behind it. I'm behind the times.
Yeah. That's a little bit. As far as I'm concerned, you just want what you want is make you a loop.
Enough to have a little loop like that and a little up here to tie on your line.
Right. All right.
Mott used to fuss at me for getting my loop too big.
Exactly.
Hey, Josh. He's going down there to catch fish. Are you going? You just drop it right down on their head.
Close to it. He's right behind that rock.
Safe.
Okay, you see the difference in them? There's no. Those are knots. The only time he has those is when he's bedding. Now you see the knots on his tail? Yeah. The only time he has those is when he's bedding. His tail will get redder. Them knots, call them horns. They grow on their nose and grow on their tail. That's to fan and root the gravel and to fan the beds out. Them knots on it.
Hey, Randy, this is addictive, isn't it?
Wow. All right, what are we doing here, Josh?
David and I are about to go get some poles and try to do this ourselves, but first, I think we're gonna change into flip-flops.
About how many pounds of rocks do you think you have in your shoe?
Oh, I'd say a couple tons. I got about a few fossils in there.
Yeah, man. You might want to run that through a screen and see if there's any gold in it.
If you catch a fish and it tightens down on the fish, and this wire comes around and makes a quick bend like this and pulls up tight.
Okay.
If it gets a kink in that wire, you try to straighten it up as best you can. Now, it should stay right there. After you want to get down and go to fishing, you should be able to keep your snare in pretty good shape. Kind of like that.
Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh,
did you get away?
Yeah. I think it was a mirror.
Just keep it right under the pole.
You got no angle at all.
Uh-uh.
You just absolutely up and down.
Yeah, straight up and down. You're just bumping it along with that lid on the bottom.
See those two holding right there? And you just let it tip the bottom, and that holds it square across the current, and you just let it tip the bottom. Well, I've got 3 out of the water.
Okay.
2 briefly, and 1 I had almost up to my hand.
Okay. Look at you. Look at that thing coming in here.
I hear that feet.
There you now.
Get him.
Hold him.
Walk him in. Pull him
Don't,
that was a big one.
Don't take them out of the water. Keep them in the water.
Oh.
You got it. You pull it up, pull it up.
Oh, baby, by the tail.
By the tail. Taylor wins.
Taylor wins.
Oh man, it's dropping eggs everywhere.
Eggs everywhere. Oh.
Dude, get that fish, man.
Or milk or whatever it is.
Oh, that's gross, man. That is so
Can you
nasty.
grab my pole for me? Thanks.
Sperm.
We got it. All right.
Awesome.
Walk your pole up to you.
Man.
I don't know who had who there.
I got a red horse a minute ago, and you can see it actually ripped the weight off of my fishing line. So Doc Brown's going up to get a replacement, but these things are strong. They really put up quite a fight.
As Tommy says, you make an apple. Kind of make an apple, smoothing the wire out like that. And then you try not to jerk it as you put it back in the wire.
Come on, baby.
Alright, so now what I do? So just kind of like...
Dude, come here.
Alright.
Dude.
You got one?
Nice, Dave.
That looks like a big
Come on,
one.
Alec.
You got it on camera?
Yeah. Dude, that's a big fish.
All right. Can you get it off the,
Yeah.
pull it forward. Dude, hold that thing up triumphantly.
Dude.
It's leaking eggs everywhere.
Over this way.
You ready to set it back down? I want to go down with you.
Eggs.
That's eggs.
Yeah, because they got on his shorts, I thought.
Really quick. That plate is going before him. You got a rock?
Tell us how you feel.
Yeah, Josh.
Feeling pretty good. Right about now.
Woo!
Indication.
Yeah, dude.
Oh, there he goes.
There he goes.
Apparently this is just a thing. Oh, is that mine then, dude?
Hey, number 2.
Number 2, baby. Feels good.
Dude, I want to keep
Man,
him,
it feels good to be a gangster. This is 5 for the group now. I'd say we're River Redhorse masters.
Yeah, dude.
Alright. I'm setting him.
I hear you, Jim.
Alex is getting a horse.
I hear you.
Are we keeping him?
We've been keeping the horses for that guy up here.
I like his pink weight, boy.
Yeah.
When we were actually out on the river, we didn't know whether or not we were going to see any red horse, but luckily we did, and we actually got out and had the chance to try to snare some. Jeremy and I had not seen any before, and this was a perfect opportunity for us to try and catch one. And unfortunately, the one that I did catch got away because I didn't follow the rule of keeping the pole underwater.
Keep it on the water.
Keep in the water, keep in the water, keep in the water.
I raised the cane pole up out of the water like a normal fishing rod, and the snare fish got away. But I did have somewhat a feel of the glory of catching a red horse.
The one thing that is so addictive about red horse fishing is that you can see the fish. They're like right there in front of you.
You're reaching out trying to get to the fish, and they're actually further or closer away than you think because of the way the light hits the water and everything.
You just have to be accurate. It's more about accuracy than kind of throwing a bait and hook out there.
And I was never actually able to snare any red horse. I got the noose over their heads a couple times, but they swam out, and so it was frustrating, but at the same time it's addicting. You kind of just want to keep doing it because you know you're so close.
Oh, you had him. Couldn't hurt him when you got him. Really.
Doc Brown was made for the river. When God created Doc Brown, he wanted to place him on the Cahaba River.
See where that bright spot is out there? That light-colored gravel? I scared 4 adult red horse off that right there.
And this man has such a passion for the river, such a passion for nature, and that is just so evident.
So if we'll get up here and sit down and be real still, they'll come back in, I think.
Randy Haddock pulled out this big net where basically a person gets on either end of it, shoves it in the water, pulls it up, and you find all these little insects and little tiny fish and grubs.
Bugs and critters like
Little fish and
something called a helgramite.
I think dragonfly larvae, and
Looked just like the leech from hell.
You know, unless you've fooled around a river with biologists to show, like Randy Haddock, to show you the richness of it. Things you wouldn't ordinarily look at. Snails, mussels, invertebrate creepy crawlies. You have no idea really how rich it is and why it's such an interesting place.
Just getting to go out on the river and actually do something fun like this with a bunch of great guys. It was just a fun bonding experience. It was a lot of fun to make.
You did that by yourself?
Oh, well, I'm not done yet.
Your turn.
The first thing I think of is us on this massive river shoal with literally hundreds of red horse surrounding us.
It's awesome because it only happens once a year, and you get to wait the entire year until this one time in April when the tulip poplar blooms, and you get to go out there and just enjoy it with your friends. It's kind of a rare treat.
I think we really all ended up learning a lot more than we realized. We learn a lot about the Cahaba and the wildlife and how important the Cahaba is.
I would say that Dr. Brown's class, folklore class, transferred into our experience and gave me a better understanding of nature and an appreciation for the outdoors.
Just to get out and to see all these people who have been doing this long-running tradition and who still continue to practice it even in our backyard, and it's something I've never heard of, something I don't think any of us are really familiar with. And just to get out there and see the passion and the excitement that comes from this seemingly simple act.
We catch a red horse with the snare, and it's just this fight to bring it in. That's just so enthralling to realize that that's what we're doing. We are partaking in this history and this folklore.
Just getting to be out in the river with people was really cool. I'm just saying the same thing over and over again.
My cousin Mott and I were fishing one time, and we had found a new bed of fish that nobody had been fishing on, and we got out to fish there, and we got our snares on the pole, and it was a big fish right in the middle of the bed, and we got there and was fishing side by side, and Mott told me, Tommy said, give me 3 drags at it and I'm gonna catch that fish. And I said, well, that's all I need, 3. And on the 3rd drag, he and I both snared the same fish and caught it at the same time. Yeah.
Just watching Todd Lovejoy work that red horse pole. He had this kind of easy nonchalance. He'd done it forever. But he had an eagle eye. And just to watch him work that red horse pole down around that fish, knowing who he was and how he waited for him all year and how he sort of celebrated that fish. I know after Mott died, I went down there one year, it was in March, and somebody told me that Mott had passed away. I'd been out of the country for a few months, and kind of hit me pretty hard. And one of the things that hit me then was I didn't know if the red horse could spawn without Mott being there to appreciate it, because I'd always been there watching him spawn with Mott.
Look out! You gotta let go of it.
Hell.
How about that?